Welcome everybody to our second digital Daylesford Discusses, and we're talking about an enormous topic tonight, the future of food. So while we're being deeply preoccupied, of course, with other major events, like for example, a pandemic, there's been enormously important discussions happening about where Britain is going to go in terms of its food. And at the same time, I was having a discussion with Tim, who is with us tonight, about some people in Britain would have had their first experience of being food insecure because the faults in our distribution lines have been shown for the first time under these very unusual circumstances we've been in. But nevertheless, what comes out of the Brexit negotiations may very well have an enormous impact on the health of the next 2 to 3 generations of British children. That's, of course, my preoccupation. And as I said to all of our panelists tonight, I can't even pretend to be unbiased tonight. So I apologize in advance, good listeners. I know very, very clearly what side of the fence I come down on in terms of food quality. But we're really lucky tonight. We have Nick from the National Farmers Union, who over this summer has been deeply involved in really what's been quite an extraordinary campaign to protect farmers. And Tim Field, our own environmental scientist from Daylesford, who is deeply involved in sustainability and with agroecology, works with a lot of people transitioning into organic farming or supporting people who are already farming, and is deeply involved in a lot of food production as well throughout the UK, not just at Daylesford. And the wonderful Jemima Jones and Lucy Carr-Ellison, who once called the Kitchen Tarts, spun that into a wonderful business, talking a lot about the kind of fresh, sustainable food that makes eating well a really delicious and quite a British thing. And so they'll be coming in towards the end, talking about what it's been like for them and for their business and what they think might happen to the industry if standards are loosened. But I'm going to begin with you, Nick, tonight. We have 10 minutes to discuss something that will take about a week. But you've had an enormously busy summer, and congratulations on a petition that got in excess of 1,100,000 signatures. That's an amazing win. So can I ask you, where are we with negotiations and what are the issues that are at stake at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you say, it's just, we could spend 10 hours on this. There's an awful lot to unpack, but I think the starting point, as with a lot at the moment, it goes back to the Brexit decision, the fact that we're leaving the EU, and so therefore the government wanting to sign a whole host of trade agreements, which it's in the middle of negotiating. So actually at the moment they're talking to the US, obviously, we're very aware of that, but also the Australians and New Zealanders. They recently did a deal with Japan. Canada's on the table at the moment. So they've got all of these trade negotiations, and there's a real political imperative in a way for the government to get those done quite quickly and to sign them. But actually what we're discovering, and I think what a lot of people knew, was actually you go into these negotiations with people who, they're not there to do you a favor, they're there to get the best result for themselves. Now, in a perfect world, everybody wins, but in truth, the only interest really any negotiators have got is their own interest. And a lot of those countries I just mentioned are big agricultural producers as well. So once they come into negotiations with the UK, what they're really looking to do is to sell us more agricultural products. And as you all know, many of those countries have different standards of production than we do here in the UK. We've come a long way, I think, in UK farming over the last 20 years. It's, there's still debates. It's still people who will argue we need to go much further. But actually, in terms of welfare, in terms of environment, in terms of all food safety as well, traceability, use of antibiotics, etc. We've really made some great progress. And that is not necessarily reflected in other countries around the world. So you suddenly get this big question, which is why we've got this big issue, which is if you're going to do deals with these countries and you're going to let them sell you more food, what does that food look like? How is it being produced? There's two big issues that arise because of that. Firstly, actually, what is the food on consumer plates going to look like? Is it going to be produced to the standards we want? And when we think, oh, this is down to consumer choice, a lot of this food is out in pubs, in fast food chains, schools, hospitals, all sorts of places where it's actually information about where your food has come from is pretty low. So there is a question mark about actually how the food that we are going to be eating is produced. What does that mean? The second point, though, is around what it means for British farmers who, with these higher standards, often have higher costs. And they will just, in many cases, be outcompeted because the lower standard food is often produced at lower costs. And therefore, it's a kind of self-perpetuating problem. The farmers you want to be producing, because they produce the high standards, can't compete and go out of business. The only farmers you can buy food from are the guys who are still there producing it more cheaply. So not only does that undermine your farming, but it also means all of that farmed landscape, 75% of the UK landscape is farmed. Who's managing that? Who's on top of that? And are they producing food in the way we want? So big, big issues, and it's all coming to a head at the moment because of the political situation with these trade negotiations at the moment.
Because the devil really is in the detail. I read a statistic on the Sustain website about America, where there's a lot of anxiety about food standards there. We've actually done a great job in public health in terms of food poisoning. And the figures in the UK are 1 in 28 people get ill from things that they've eaten. And in America, it's 1 in 6. So I'm not sure that people are aware of quite how dramatically different standards really are in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different food system over there, for a number of reasons. But their culture really is just about producing food and being kind of almost the breadbasket for the world. And you produce it as much as you can, however you can. They have a capability to do that because obviously in America, there's a lot of empty space. So you can have these sort of large feedlot type systems, which, are largely sort of unseen or unknown because they really are in the middle of nowhere. In the UK, we're a small island. People are very close, to where we produce food. People feel it. People go out to the countryside. They see the farmed environment, and it's much more sort of integrated. Even though I think we all feel we could do a lot more about educating, particularly urban populations about where their food comes from. America is a different system, and I'm loath in a way I don't criticize American farmers, firstly because actually there's American farmers who do great things as well, so you have to be careful not to sort of tar everyone with the same brush. But secondly, this is they produce to the system that they're in, and this is how they operate, and the regulations allow them to operate in that sense. But it is a very different looking system over there.
Nick, I think the other thing that I'd like to talk to you about is when we're talking about farming, we're talking about something different to say, I don't know, making a piece of machinery. Like if we lose farmers, if we lose particular ways of growing things, or we lose some of our hill farmers who are growing lamb, things that have been around for centuries, we lose more than just a family business, don't we? We begin to lose lots.
Absolutely, it's very much the fabric of the countryside. So you're right; these businesses are often small family farms. They're part of the local economy and the rural economy. And actually, if you lose those, you can start to undermine, total whole rural communities. And as I said, it's also in many instances these farmers who are managing the land and the landscape. If they're not on the land doing that, you've got to find somebody else, and you've got to pay somebody else to do that. And that's really crucial because we are in a situation at the moment, which many people watching probably aware of reforming the way that we support farmers through our policy. So we're out of the EU, we're out of the Common Agricultural Policy. We're putting in place a new system, which is primarily based around paying what we call public money for public goods. So encouraging farmers to do environmental works, etc. And there's a whole debate to be had around that. But at its core, what we really want is a system, a UK system that supports farmers to produce food in a sustainable way, and to encourage them to do that, and to integrate the two together. So you're accepting you want food production on the land, but you want it done in an environmentally sympathetic, sustainable way. It's a kind of win-win if you get it right. But if you undermine these farmers, if they can't make a profit, and ultimately that's, they've got to make a livelihood, then you miss out on both fronts. You lose the ability to produce food on these shores, which you want, but also the ability to manage the land in the way that you want.
And so losing the ability to produce some food, I'm going to ask you a ridiculous question, so I apologize in advance, but how long does it take to get these things up and running again? Because if we start to go back and try to revive an industry, for example, we find that the food miles are too long and there's a distribution problem, and we need to start looking to our own food security as well as things about trade. How long does it take to get things up and running again if they've collapsed?
It could take a long time. I think that's absolutely right. If people walk away, then the land begins to become less suitable for farming. But also, I think it's more the point that if the people who've walked away found it unprofitable, if they found it unviable, something that just wasn't plausible for them to continue doing, then who are you going to find to take that up again? And I think there is a question mark over that, because actually you may end up finding the only people who can do it are people who can do it in a certain way, an intensive way, purely based around productivity. Again, I'm not going to criticize that. People have got to make a living, but ultimately, is that the vision for the future of UK farming?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And anything, I've just got to say congratulations for the petition. That was amazing. Do you think that that's spun opinion? Do you think that that's helped the cause?
I think it's massively helped the cause, but there's still more to be done. So what we have got now is a few things. I'll just run it up as quick as I can, because I know the clock's ticking. But the government has now been very clear in committing that it will uphold and safeguard our production standards in all of its trade deals, and that's in black and white in the documents it's published around those trade deals. They've now set up a Trade and Agriculture Commission to advise the government on how to make sure that our standards aren't undermined in those trade deals. So they definitely moved in the right direction, and I think they've definitely accepted actually that there's an issue here that needs dealing with, and they can't brush it under the carpet. But having said that, I think we feel they've only gone half the way. There's still a real risk that those trade deals can just be signed, they'll come into effect, Parliament won't have a vote, our MPs won't have a say, and that's it, kind of deal done. And actually the big thing, and that's why people need to keep kind of pushing this as much as they can, is to make sure that actually Parliament and MPs have a vote on trade deals, which they don't at the moment, or they don't have to if the government doesn't want them to do at the moment. And that's a real shortfall in democratic ability to scrutinise deals. So there's definitely more to be done. It's definitely not perfect, but it's sort of slowly moving in the right direction.
On the way, but we've got the risk that they might ask to apologise rather than ask for permission. So we have to be aware.
Yes, that's
Thank
exactly
you.
it.
I'm going to come back to you when we have the general discussion. I'm certainly going to be asking you in our last 15 minutes what people can do in terms of supporting further. And thank you. And I'll come to Tim now. Tim, we've just lived through an unusual time where, if anything, we've learnt that food miles have been a real problem for us. And have I got you there, Tim?
Yeah.
And so we're now looking at bringing food from much, much further away and from very much more intensively grown environments, and less transparency. And what do you think of the environmental impacts? What are your thinking? What's your thinking around where we are at the moment?
Well, it is, Let's just start. I'm going to start and say well done to Nick and the rest of the NFU, because for the first time in 20 years of myself working, studying the land and working on the land and 13 years at Daylesford, we've never been more united as a farming community in Britain. And it actually predates this. It's because I think Britain is on a good trajectory towards more sustainable farming methods. But you do look, in answer to your question, look abroad, and it is frightening at the old school thought that you can just keep on throwing inputs into agriculture, artificial inputs from outside the land, outside the system, and increase productivity.
Things like petrochemical-based fertilizers and
antibiotics. Antibiotics is probably one of the most scary. And in order to just keep on sweating that system for all it's worth. And we've recognised in this country that you can't do that into perpetuity. But that's the problem. If we allow our system to decline and let in a lot of the cheaper, more intensively produced food, we're just exporting our environmental impact, and that won't last forever. We won't be able to be fed from abroad forever if all our sources of food, whether that's in Brazil or America or wherever, are just trashing their landscapes. Where does our food come from then? And as Nick and yourselves were just discussing there, if we let our skills go from this nation, from our farmers, it's going to be very difficult to reskill. I was just thinking we've sort of already slightly neglected our horticulturalists in this country. We should be using more fruit and vegetables in this country than we do, and that's through various policy and market drivers. We don't want that to happen to the rest of our farmers.
Yeah, because we've discovered now with I mean, it feels a bit more distant now because supermarkets did a great job of steadying themselves and getting food supplies back, but we've had a little taste of what it's like to not be able to get food from Italy, for planes not to be running as much. So at a time when we've learnt that these very, very cumbersome, very, very long distribution chains leave us quite vulnerable, it's interesting that we are even discussing making ourselves more vulnerable in terms of food sustainability and security.
Quite, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're on an island which is incredibly productive. We have wonderful soft weather that's warm and wet. It grows great grass, it grows great crops. We have a population on the doorstep, so we don't have to distribute it a long way. We can grow, vegetables in the winter. We can have livestock outwintered. We are given an extraordinarily productive environment to work with. Yet we want to lose the potential of that environment to produce our own food. So it's not just about being, supporting our neighbours and supporting high welfare standards and so on. It's actually about doing the moral right thing by our planet, by using the great environment that we've got and not looking to those that are suffering droughts or water shortages or floods or whatever else, soil depletion for our food. Indeed, so we should make sure that we're getting it locally.
And what about the role of organic farming in this? Because I think it seems to me that the conversation, of course, we both work with Daylesford and we love the organic solution, but we're talking a lot about sustainability that can be more than just organic. That's one of many. I mean, the NFU website says that there's lots of different solutions to sustainability.
Yeah, I think.
Question, but
no, I'll pick up on that because I always think there's 10 reasons for being organic, 10 reasons to choose organic food, but actually there's only one reason for choosing organic food because there's 9 reasons that actually apply to many different churches, philosophies of food production in Britain that all sit under what I like to call agroecological methods. But there's conservation agriculture, there's regenerative agriculture, there's all these different sort of terms, permaculture, biodynamic, agroforestry. Going back to those 10 reasons why you might want to choose organic. It is more resilient into the future. It produces less environmental pollutants. It is better for wildlife. It is GM-free, guaranteed GM-free. It uses less antibiotics. It is more nutritionally dense. I'm running out of the 10. I believe it tastes better as well. Yeah. But the 10th one, and the most important, and actually those 9 can all apply to non-organic foods as well. The 10th one is it's food you can trust, because you have that traceability in an organic system with an auditor coming onto farm. It's written into law. And that, if you think, is what we're talking about with the British standards as well. If we can show that food is being produced in Britain, it's being produced to a good standard. Yeah. If it's got an organic logo on it, it means that that welfare, that stocking density is lower. It means that there's, you know, tighter policing on antibiotic usage, and so on and so forth. So there's actually only one reason for going organic, and that is because of that traceability and trust. But those other 9 reasons are really important to the whole of British agriculture in its transition to more sustainable production.
So when we're talking about sustainable food production, I'm a bit obsessed by externalities, and as you know, and can you just explain what that is? Because it sounds like, to get a cheap, if we were to bring in high intensity food from overseas, we will be ignoring these externalities, and we just can't, in terms of economics, for too long. So could you talk about those a bit?
Yeah, let's think of 3 quick examples. So one would be water pollution. If you are applying a lot of fertilizer to the soil and it's washing out, or a slug treatment like a metaldehyde, and it's getting into the water course, it then costs a huge amount to take that pollution out of the water for the water company. The water company is having to invest that, and so ultimately it's the person that's paying the water company, which is us, it's the taxpayer, it's the person paying their rates or buying the water. So,
but it's never the agrochemical company. They never ever have to mop up any.
Indeed, exactly. Another externality might be overuse of antibiotics, and then the resistance that comes from antibiotic overuse, and those bacteria getting resistance to it, and then the costs then of our human health, because some of those antibiotics we actually share with livestock, and then all of a sudden we can't use them to treat ourselves. So it's not necessarily a financial cost. And likewise with biodiversity, we get a huge amount of public goods, that Nick was mentioning earlier, from being able to walk around. The endorphins flow when you see a barn owl fly out at dusk, or a wonderful murmuration of starlings gets up, and it's just, there's something more than just calories coming out of the farm that you've just walked out across. And if you just focus on calorie production, you lose all those other externalities.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we've got here is, how much of the nation's food could we actually produce ourselves, do you think?
Well, it's a very good question, and that's why I think, if I go back to my first sort of point, we're very good at producing food on this island, and we have a great environment to do it. But we've become quite accustomed to chocolate, coffee, I don't know, limes with our gin, and various other things which we shouldn't be trying to grow in this country, because we don't have the climate. And so whilst we could probably survive on by ourselves, the winter or spring vegetable selection isn't as glamorous if you don't have a little bit of Mediterranean spice in it, or fruit and veg. So yes, we could do 100%, I'm sure. Our diets would have to shift radically. We wouldn't be eating corn-fed ruminant livestock like beef and sheep and dairy. We would be reliant on grass-fed, which means probably less production and more fruit, veg pulses. We'd probably grow more pulses ourselves as well, more tatties maybe. And so it would be a very different diet, but I'm sure we could, but I'm not sure even I would settle for that.
We probably don't need to, but the more that we produce locally, and the more Malika in our audience has said we would eat more seasonally too, which, so thank you, Tim, because Malika's just given me the most perfect segue into speaking with Jemima and Lucy now, who are masters of seasonal eating and preparing seasonal food. And so have you been watching everything that's been happening with the food negotiations and the future of food? Because you're at the other end, aren't you? You're preparing food and you're serving food and you're educating through your cookbooks and other ways, helping people to eat more seasonally. I mean, where is your thinking at the moment, looking at all the negotiations and post-Brexit food?
Well, for us, I guess there's sort of like two sides. There's the side of what we believe in, and from what we want our story to be within the restaurant that we have, and on the moral side of really wanting to get the best produce, work with the best producers, and to the flip side of needing to guarantee quality, being able to have the information there at our fingertips for customers. We just opened our restaurant before Christmas, and this whole new world of really having to track where the food has come from is sort of so important. And I mean, it might slightly take the fun out of it, but it's sort of like almost at the forefront for us.
Yeah, definitely. And it is just for us so amazing, the big awakening in food standards over the last decade, I would say. Just even thinking back to our childhoods and just how that farm to fork notion wasn't really around back then, and how now people really care about where their food comes from. People love that story, the provenance of where it's come from, how it's local, and farmers through that take accountability. And I would also say the lights of Netflix and the different kind of series that have come out through that on health and farming has been amazing in getting people more aware and more mindful about what they're eating, and for example, eating less meat, and the kind of, for us, I would say the kind of it feels like the kind of heinous crimes that are happening out there with factory farming at the moment, and just being aware of that is so exciting at the moment. Working in the food industry, and getting to really be at the forefront of all of that right now, and kind of speak out about that.
And I think, we perhaps might have been slightly naive. We thought that everybody, thinks like us, you want to have, exactly where your carrots come from, exactly where your lambs come from. And, we've learned so much by opening this restaurant, and kind of like in a shocking way, even some chefs that have even come through our doors, are very quick to cut corners to make their GP, and that I think was really surprising to us. And so we're sort of within our company itself, trying to educate and getting people from different farmers and different producers, and explaining why we're working with such producers. There's down to this amazing girl who runs Florist Produce, and she has runs everything by horse and cart. She's there, and and it's so interesting. And it's not that, of course, we can use all of her produce for everything on the menu, but it's amazing to even be able to have, let's say, a carrot from there, and to explain to people who we work with, and then as well to our customers. And that's it. It feels really wonderful when you actually really can look somebody in the eye and tell them where where your produce comes from.
Yeah, for sure. I would say it's a big part of our customers coming back to the restaurant is something that we really speak out about, and we try and speak out about, as much as possible, and put it onto our menus where the food has come from. We try as much as we can get some of the meat from my farm. I've got a little farm in Somerset, and Lucy's got a farm in Northumberland. And to be able to really speak out about that, Tamworth pigs from my farm and Belter Galloway cows from Lucy's farm, and to really be able to, talk out about that. I think people really like to come and they, hearing that story, and that's really amazing right now. To be able to go somewhere and hear about, that these pigs have been out in the woods and they've been like snuffling and having the sun on their backs and been, eating acorns and all the scraps left over from the vegetable garden. I go with my children and we feed the pigs, and, they love, they just love all the scraps, and that's all just really exciting. And it's such a kind of scary thought about lowering production on costs, with food producers, because they've kind of forgotten that like basic farming belief of respect and kindness for animals, and for the environment, and also for the production of food, that it should be delicious and it should be nutritious. And that's, what people really want, and that's what people really buy into.
And I think, on that cost point, it's again, another thing that we've learned is that you think, I want to have a certain steak on the menu, and I want this, and you want that, and God, wouldn't it? And then when you're actually doing it, and you suddenly realize by having that certain steak all the time on the menu, you're getting through cow after cow after cow. And so this summer, when we came back, we didn't open the restaurant in the same way. We opened it, we called it a pop-up, it's a much shorter menu. And we just really wanted to respect, we're going to choose one animal, and it was, in a sense, Jemima's pigs, her Tamworth, and we got in the whole pig, and we went, in that nose to tail, we went through it, and through that we learned about how, we were going to cure parts of it, and how then that could come onto the menu in a few weeks' time once we've got through the other cuts. And it's humbling and it's amazing to learn with that. But I think, if others can see that there's a way around the cost, and you're still being able to make your GPs by, and that also goes then with the seasons. It's frustrating. You might just get there with the most amazing asparagus dish you've ever done, and then suddenly the next week, bam, asparagus is out of season, and you're coming up with something else, which is challenging, but it's also very exciting. And I think that's how you can sort of navigate your way around, still being able to make a profit in the restaurant. But, it's definitely not the easy route.
Yeah, no. And so you find that there is just a lot of demand for that. There are a lot of people who think like you think, that we want to know where our food is. And there is a kind of joy in reviving some of these old skills as well. Like you mentioned, nose to tail eating. That involves a lot of recipes that would have been commonplace in 30s Britain.
Yeah. Of course, you've got to, think on the spot. We just had half a cow come in today, and it's quite overwhelming, and but before you know it, you've got stock pots on, and we've got ribs on the special, and then you're just like, oh, it feels so good that you're really respecting like the whole animal. And the food waste is up so much, that whatever it is in food banks in the last 5 years, and that's so upsetting to know. And having the costs lower means that people are just chucking stuff away. And if we could just go back to really kind of using every single part of it. And there's that amazing restaurant Silo, which is uses every part of the vegetable. There's no food waste, and that's I mean, kudos to them. We really try, but occasionally some peelings go in the quantity. But if we could really sort of try and steer in that direction, then I think that's the way forward, really.
So you're basically, it seems that you're both feeling that if industry food was loosened, the standards were loosened, then really we're importing more cruelty, less transparency. Do you see any upsides to loosening standards for British food?
I mean, for us, like, no. Unfortunately,
nothing would change for us. We would still carry on with the same ethos and philosophy that we've always upheld. But I think undoubtedly for many hospitality places, they would, price over everything else for them.
Yeah, it's making your, of course they're going to cut corners, and they're going to go for cost. If you can get that on a carrot, they're going to do that, which is really sad, because I feel like we're just getting to that bit where, and people are trying hard, and they are listening, and they are, we're just working with a new supplier called Shrub Provisions, and there's these two guys, and they come in one week with these amazing pumpkins from this guy who's just obsessed with making pumpkins. And that isn't just us. There are other places which are doing that, and it's amazing, and it's so cool to then suddenly just have on the menu just a pumpkin dish because you're celebrating that, and suddenly to just go fall away so quickly, which you would do, and sadly
it's scary and upsetting through the animals suffering and environmental damage, and also just for our own health as well.
And our own farmers, and people eating from different food environments where there is less transparency, and it's not so much a treat, but just their general after school clubs and catering companies and things like that, where we actually want this ethos that you're talking about to be able to spread, not to be withdrawn from. So now it might be a good time to get any questions from anybody who's here listening to us. We've got the chat room up, and we've got the lovely Caitlin who will be able to send questions. Have you got any questions for any of us, for Tim or Nick or Lucy, and for me or Jemima? Please type away. We'd love to hear from you. But in general, how was, for you two who are into cooking and serving food, how's 2020 been for you? How's all the upheaval with food and serving and COVID been for you?
Well, it's been mad, just sort of navigating day to day,
and a big learning curve along the way. And it's all completely been new to us, and just having to make do as we go along and learn along the way. But we have just the most incredible team working for us, who's been so supportive, and customers coming back. And I think through it there has been positives. This is great. I think we're in the restaurants. Suppliers are always coming to you, and it's in a way can be, if you let it be, quite easy to be able to get your hands on good produce. But at home, sometimes it's difficult for, I think, farms to get straight to the consumer. And things have been born out of this, like this wonderful Farms to Feed Us, which has been put together by a group of volunteers and activists and journalists, and it's a database where where you've got the farms and what you do, or whether you're a bakery, or you're making specific cheese, and then you yourself at home can contact that farm. And I think that's amazing, and that's really positive to come out of this. So
and so this is a general question, but probably more for Jemima and Lucy. So Tracy, thank you for asking us, but she's asking, what do you all feel about eating meat versus being veggie, for our health and for the environment too?
I think it's amazing that so many people have become so mindful in recent years about eating less meat. For us, meat should be something that should be celebrated, and eating very good quality meat and really knowing where that meat has come from. And of course, with that comes a higher cost, but then meat should be something that shouldn't be eaten all the time. It should be that thing that should just be eaten, maybe a couple of times a week.
But in the restaurant, we are, of course, meat and fish are there and they're celebrated, but so are vegetables more so, and I love that, and that's how we've always kind of looked at it, and yeah, like you said, the better quality, but less of it.
Right. Thank you, Tim. I've got a question for you.
Yeah, I've seen it. Great one.
Yes. What does the future of farming look like? The next generation of farmers and farming practices such as vertical farming, hydroponic farming, and the role of technology in more sustainable practices like precision farming. The light is on fire.
So yeah, this is brilliant. I'm watching this chat and it's fantastic. Some brilliant questions, and that's really played into a pre-prepared answer. And I think probably Nick might say, he'll have some good examples, I'm sure, as well. But I don't think we should be writing off anything at the moment, but I think we need more focus on systems that require that ecological interaction. So we need to increase our understanding of the soil biome, for instance, how mycorrhizal fungi, which transport nutrients around the soil to plants, to our crops, to make them healthy and strong and grow properly. All these things which you can do more harm in trying to create productivity through sort of artificial ways, and you can really amplify them by doing very simple non-intervention methods. So that's a very waffly way of saying we need to understand our soil better, we need to understand our plants better, keep diversity, keep that genetic bank going. Don't put all our eggs in one basket by being sent down the river saying this one crop will solve this one seed will solve all your insect problems, or be resistant to blight or whatever. We need to keep the genetic diversity in our food system. Hydroponics will be terrific in certain environments, but I believe that to get that nutritional density, to get that although all that the soil has to offer, a plant needs to be in the soil. A plant needs a certain amount of stress, I choose my words carefully, to increase its phytochemicals and its nutrition density. Yeah. But if you have everything handed to it on a plate through a liquid, through a water medium, and you think you're getting all the nutritional balance that plant requires, I can guarantee you won't be, because there's a very complex soil microbiome beneath a traditionally grown, soil-grown plant that will be feeding all sorts and triggering all sorts of other plant interactions, intercellular and so on. So I believe there is a place for hydroponics on the sides of high-rise buildings, or in basements, or old tube routes, or whatever else in city centres, but I don't think we should be putting all our eggs into one sort of technological solution. I think there's a great place for drones, quick, rapid soil assessment for carbon. There's so much we can go for, and there in itself, carbon should be a revenue source for farmers in addition to producing food. So definitely, and then in terms of government intervention, so I'll do this quickly. We've been working at Daylesford on something with Sustainable Food Trust. In fact, Nick and I were at a meeting once talking to Patrick Holden about this. True cost accounting written effectively into future policy. We're doing a test with DEFRA on measuring and creating a metrics of all of those externalities. So your water quality, your energy usage, your emissions, your livestock health, antibiotic usage, all of those things. So when it comes to paying farmers for the public goods that they provide, which they're not necessarily getting from just producing calories of food, the government can stimulate that kind of a system, farming system, through the public purse. But I go back to the carbon comment. If we can measure carbon effectively in the soil, there's a huge market to go after, and that excites me. Yeah.
And Lottie, I can't help but put my 2 cents worth into your question, which Tim's just addressed to briefly as well. Will government intervention be essential to persuade everyone to support more sustainable eating habits, e.g. nose to tail organic? What do you wish this intervention looked like? And very, very quickly, it's a very delicate path for the government to tell people what to eat. But this really is one that I'd like to ask Nick about, not so much necessarily about organic, but I think part of what the NFU is attempting to do and agroecology is attempting to do is at least certainly what Tart Wild is trying to do, is to get people to link the food that they're eating with where it comes from and to value your farmer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think, at the core of this, there's a very tricky question. It comes to the role of government, the role of the farmers themselves to promote what they're doing better, the role of the media, for example, in promoting a lot of this stuff. I mean, I at a personal level feel a bit uneasy about suggesting this should be, the role of government to intervene and require people to behave in a certain way. I think, as a democracy in a free country, that always grates a little bit. But there is a role for government. Tim was just talking about the public goods, public money for public goods system. And, ultimately this is because there's lots of questions coming in and these are all interlinked, but this is because actually governments all over the world support their farmers one way or another. So if you have a government that doesn't, like in the UK, then you come back to what I was saying right at the beginning of farmers just being left to the market and losing out, being outcompeted by cheaper, lower standard food. So there is a role for government, like it or not, is what I'm saying. And so therefore, actually, we are having this conversation. What is it that government are paying to do? What is it that they're incentivizing? Let's put it like that. But that comes into the question somebody also asked about the price of food. And again, it's a really tricky one, because ultimately that underpins the system that exists all across the developed world, that people don't have to pay too much for their food. Actually, that's kind of difficult to argue against. People have never been better fed, even if all the problems we've talked about this evening, still in historical context, people have never been better fed.
Yes.
And that's because food is cheap. My personal view, it's too cheap, and therefore it's not valued. But it's a very difficult, again, thorny issue, because are we really suggesting that, the single mum in a housing estate in Liverpool should be paying more for her food? That is not something I'm comfortable saying personally. So you actually have to try and work out, well, if you're going to have cheap food, or affordable food, or however you want to put it, who's actually paying? Is it the farmer? Is it the consumer? Is it the taxpayer, etc.? And work out actually the best way you can get consumers still are having affordable food, but farmers able to produce food to high standards, which costs them money. That costs money. And unfortunately, that does, I think, involve quite a degree of government intervention. But what I've tried to paint a picture there is there are no easy answers to this stuff, because there's all those little competing interests. We could farm in a certain way, very high standards, but that adds cost to the system. And ultimately, if that pushes food prices up, somebody ends up paying for that.
And I think that the very, very cheap chicken that's become emblematic of these trade talks, that's not a cheap chicken at all. It's just that our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren are going to pay for that cheap chicken. We've just put the costs out of mind, and the people who are producing that chicken are not paying the costs, and we, the consumers eating it, are not paying the true cost, which it goes back to what Tim was talking about with externalities, my personal obsession. And they've also, Michelle and Carolyn have both mentioned Zach Bush. So I might bring you back on this, Tim, because there is actually a lot. They talk about the Farmers Footprint Project in the UK, but there's a lot happening in the Farmers Footprint is in the US, I think. There's a lot also happening in terms of British farmers as well, and sustainability. And I don't think it gets the publicity that I think it really deserves. I think people would be shocked to know that pigs can't be kept in these slatted boxes that they can be kept in the US, and that our beef herds are smaller and mainly outdoors. I mean, do you find that, Nick, that there might be a bit of a PR thing, that in fact, even though we might argue that things could be even better than they are now, things are not as bad as the Netflix documentaries that I think it was Lucy mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly NFU, we try and promote, lots of these aspects of British farming, and that's a lot of what we're doing with the petition you mentioned earlier. And maybe it comes back to the point I made right at the beginning that there is a job for all of us to do in educating. Sounds a bit kind of patrician, but you know what I mean, telling people and teaching people about where food comes from, how the countryside works. And you're right, as I've said, the system in this country, and I'm sure there's room for improvement, but the system in this country looks very different than it does in other parts of the world. Truth be told, though, and this is one of the great challenges, and coming back to that question about the price of food, most people, and I think Jemima and Lucy touched on this when they said the sort of learning they'd been through, most people buy food based on price, and that is an unfortunate fact, and that is one of the really tricky drivers behind all of this. We would love to think that, I'm sure everybody watching now, takes a lot of care, puts a lot of thought into the food they buy and the food they eat. But unfortunately, that is not representative of the public at large. So it's a hell of a battle. What the really important learning from that is that actually many consumers in the UK, they simply trust the outlets that they buy their food from, whether that's the retailers, whether that's the restaurants they go to, or whatever. And actually, we kind of demonize the supermarkets a bit, but I think they've come a long way in the UK in recent years. That the issue that we're all scared about with American food, for example, coming into the UK due to lower standards, is actually not that it's going to end up on supermarket shelves, because most supermarkets won't go there. They actually have quite high standards, often higher than the legal requirements, private standards. So there's an element of trust there when people go to the shop that the food is going to meet those high standards. If we drop, because of these trade deals, the legal requirements, we start undermining that trust. Actually, you start undermining the brand of good British food, and I think that's one of the real risks behind all of this. That this has taken decades to build trust in our food system, and if we're careless with it in the trade deals we do in the months and years ahead, then you start undermining that trust, and that becomes a real problem.
Yeah. And while I've got you, Nick, a question from Peter. So you're in touch with a lot of farmers. Do you think that I know that our general British population is aging. Are we hemorrhaging young people from the land still? Because we certainly are in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a problem. There is a sort of structural issue with farming. I mean, funnily enough, this question always comes up, the age of farmers. It is, I can't remember, Tim, it's sort of 59 or 60, the average age of a farmer. It is old. But, well, for an average age, I mean, not in itself. And I think it is right up there in terms of to average age for occupations. But I mean, actually, sometimes I think so what? As you say, it's not on. If they can do the job, then fine, and maybe we shouldn't get too head up by it. What I think is important is that there is a supply chain of new thinking, new ideas into the industry. Now, that often will come from younger people coming into it, but it doesn't have to. So the issue, I think, is not so much about the age of the average farmer. It's actually about how do we ensure that we get some of this new thinking, which frankly is often old thinking, just stuff we've forgotten about. But how do we get new thinking? Someone referred to earlier, technology, precision technology, and the like that can make us farm in a more sustainable way, and make sure that comes in. So I think that's the challenge, rather than a simple, let's get young people in. But as I say, often that will come through the younger generation coming through.
Can I bring Jemima and Lucy in on this too, because you deal directly with your farmers and your own farms, and you're probably part of what I see as a wave of bringing back a lot of traditions around food and educating around food and sustainability. But also, it sounds to me like you're not in touch with a lot of very elderly farmers, but that you may be in touch with a movement that's getting a bit of new blood on the land, would you say?
I mean, yeah.
Any sense at all? I'm sorry.
No, I mean, within even my own family, my father's as a farmer, and now so is my brother, and so that's really nice to see. And actually, a lot of the producers that we're working with are young, and you know, they're people who have like maybe had it with London, and they're going to go and they're going to do the passion. They're really obsessed with burrata. Our burrata and our mozzarella comes from
good reason. Burrata is so good.
Yeah. And our halloumi and our feta as well. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah. They all come from London. Halloumi comes from North London. Our burrata comes from out west, and so that's really amazing to see. But I think, you know, sometimes the challenge is where we find our farmers up in Northumberland, and you know, we want to get our beef down to the restaurant, and it's really hard because, you know, I think if we could go back to supporting smaller operations in this way, it would be actually smaller abattoirs. Then you would be able to get your in our instance, we have grass-fed beef and lamb to be able to sort of direct to smaller butcher chains and straight to restaurants, where it's really hard, you know. They're often owned by big sort of multinational companies, and it's hard if you're just doing something on a small scale to be able to navigate that. And I was really surprised about how hard it would be getting our cows from our farm to the restaurant. And you know, that's almost a question that I would ask, you know, do you think that's even possible? Do you think that, you know, we will be able to start to do that? Or now that things are owned by such big companies, do you think we can paddle back or go forward to supporting smaller operations?
Finally, Tim, thank you. And finally, Tim, can I bring you in and see if we can squeeze 2 questions into the last 2 minutes? So Charmian's asking about other countries, including Finland, and their farming practices through agroecology, or just through your interest in general. Where do you think Britain stands in terms of farming and sustainability practices? And what about 2050? Do you think that our current practices means that we can sustain feeding the increased populations predicted in 2050? 1 minute each question.
Okay, I'll do my best. So yeah, I see Malika Jones has also asked about how we can encourage Daylesford style practices. Well, Daylesford is one of 45 profile farms on agroecology, and we have over 120 different institutional contributions on that platform, promoting one thing, that is farming with nature. Lots of organic farmers, but others as well. The NFU's Championing Farm and Environment are heavily represented there as well. So it's about coming together, sharing our best practice. On the abattoir point, you know, there's innovation in mobile abattoirs that we can look to the future. There are some exciting things out there. Finland, yes, we have actually drawn some European some research from Europe and actually America as well. But I think you know, you need to be thinking about the way you farm your own soil, your own farming system first, and then taking ideas from those sort of Nuffield scholars that lucky go around the world. And Joel Salatin, who I've heard speak a few times, brilliant inspiration coming from America. And actually, what you see in America, going back to America, it's this polarization of systems, and that's what I fear in the UK. We don't want to go and have this divergence, because the people that can't afford the good food will just get sicker in their diet and so on. Did that answer both questions?
I think so. And yes, produce from within walking distance. So I'm afraid we've come to an end, really sadly, because I wanted to keep going. And Nick, I've got 100 more questions for you as well. I suppose in summing up is be a friend to our farmers. And the minute that we pull the city and the farms closer together, a lot of the potential solutions become clearer for us. And thank you all, everybody, for being here with us tonight. Thank you to all of our lovely audience and our second Daylesford Discusses online. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.